from King's College in Cambridge and from the podcast Kings of Curiosity, taking you on a journey of discovery to understand what some of the brightest minds in Britain are up to, why it matters, and how it could make our world better. I'm your host, Gillian, Provost of King's College, and I took the role because I passionately believe we need to help the next generation of brilliant minds. Our thinkers, our scientists, our artists and writers, they're national treasures, and they're a huge resource for the country and the wider world, and we should be celebrating them, supporting them, and, of course, funding them if we want to imagine a better future. So I'm sat here today across from the historic King's College Chapel, one of the most famous architectural landmarks in Cambridge, if not Britain. Beautiful fan-vaulted ceilings and stained glass windows and all that incredible wood carving. But here's a secret. High above all that beautiful 15th century building is actually a modern innovation, solar panels. We put them on the roof in 2023, and what they symbolize is not just our commitment to green energy, but also the idea that just because you have amazing history, that doesn't have to trap you in the past like a museum. It can be a springboard to innovation. And today we're going to be exploring what that means in a very practical term around green tech. So I'm joined today by two amazing research fellows at King's, one of whom is Shannon Bonke, who works in the field of renewable energy chemistry. He's from Australia. And the other one is Zhuangan Li, who's a material scientist from China. And they're each in their different ways looking at where innovation can take us into a new, hopefully greener future. So thanks for coming along, Shannon and Zhuangan. Great to have you both with me today. So a lot of people are looking for a kind of magic wand to solve our problems with net zero and say, well, can't we just stick electric batteries on everything or have a solar panel on everything and that will solve the problem? Shannon, give us a sense in terms of the numbers about why you think that wouldn't work.
Yeah, it'd be a pleasure. So I think solar panels are indeed crucial. And I think they provide, combined with wind, the big energy input that we need to replace fossil fuels, right? And net zero, a lot of people would sell that as like, we have to change everything about the world. And that's one approach. It's not one I'm a huge fan of because it's particularly complicated. But when you really dig down to it, I think net zero can be much simpler because there's the three pillars of getting to net zero. We need the generation, so that's your solar and your wind, and then your shorter term and your rapid storage, which is your batteries. Something being able to stabilize the grid, being able to power, personal devices, domestic things, cars, this sort of thing. And then the last piece is how do we get that seasonal storage and that big power density that we can keep our cities lit up, that we can keep heating systems running, that we can keep jets moving, and that's the fuels. Those are the three pieces that really need to come together.
So in some ways, there isn't a single magic wand that's going to get us to net zero.
I think it's a big balance. 81% of UK emissions come from energy, right? And that includes heating, electric transport. When you pull all the energy component out of all of that, that's all fossil fuels. So if we want to reach net zero and replace all that, we basically just need to replace that energy source. And we can put solar and wind in as an input. But what we really need to do is address what we're going to do on a windless summer night in the south of England. Wind and solar are all great when they're available. But that reliability, having that energy on demand and in the right places is something that currently we don't really have good answers to. I think the amount of power we're talking about is incredible. So when we talk about, batteries, we talk about sort of milliamp hours or amp hours of power. The UK uses 2,000 terawatt hours of energy, right? That's not electricity, that's including gas, transport, all that energy.
And it uses that, every day, every year?
Yearly.
Yearly. So every year, 2,000
terawatt hours.
Hours of energy.
10 to the 9.
Well, that's a lot. It's a very big number.
Right.
And you can't do that off the back of an electric battery.
The battery would be huge. It would be so big, the amount of metal that it would require would be tremendous. So for that bigger storage, that's not going to work. We need to be able to buffer seasonally. We need to make sure we can power cities overnight. Hopefully we're going to be able to electrify the heating system. And that is going to put mean a huge amount more generation as well.
So the numbers don't work in terms of using batteries to power our world. What about the other options like solar panels? I mean, can they power our world instead? Or are we having, when you look at the amount of energy we need, is a problem that we just cannot create enough renewable sources for that energy?
We can create enough. Solar will be enough, right? There's more than enough non-arable land, basically desert on Earth, that we can generate enough power to power everything we need. Trivially, you could roughly power the whole world off a section of the Australian desert. Actually, it's big enough, let alone all the other deserts we have. So that's very viable that we can get enough energy. But can we get it where we need it and when we need it? That's a huge challenge.
So Shannon, you're working in the field of carbon capture. That's why you argue that one of the key components is going to be not just providing new sorts of energy, but sucking carbon out and recycling it. Tell us what you're doing and what exactly carbon capture is, because a lot of people don't understand it.
So basically what we want to do is we want to take carbon dioxide straight out of the air, out of emissions towers, directly out of the air, capture that. Specifically, we're going to flow it. You can imagine it coming over some sort of surface, right? It's going to stick. And then we're going to put some energy into it. We're going to convert it. And we're going to release something else.
Amazing. So does that mean you stick something in, what is it? You stick something in the air, or you create a box or a lab, or how does it work in terms of how do you actually capture those carbon molecules?
At the moment, what we really look at is developing, the surfaces, the sites that can really capture carbon, the molecules, the chemistry to do that. So really developing molecules that capture carbon. So in the same way that like in our blood, hemoglobin, for example, and myoglobin, they really bind oxygen and CO2 and transport it around. We take some inspiration from how they look, what that chemistry looks like, to design sites to really capture and bind things.
So it's a bit like putting a magnet in the air and having all the carbon molecules attracted to that, capturing them and then trying to turn it into something else. Is that how it works roughly?
I think that's very fair. It's also very analogous to what you and I are doing right now, actually, as we breathe. So right now, we're inhaling air into our lungs, oxygen's sticking onto the interior surfaces and being transported around. At the same time, carbon dioxide that was captured in the muscles has been transported to the lungs, where it's now been released and coming out.
Amazing. So you capture the carbon, hopefully.
Yeah.
And what do you then do with it? Do you bury it underground or try and get rid of it? Or, what happens to that carbon?
I think at the moment, a lot of people talk about carbon going underground, or a few people have spoken about that. And that's something that's one way of doing it. I'm actually a believer in this case of recycling. And so I think if we use renewable energy and we put that energy into the carbon, we can then convert that carbon dioxide into useful chemicals. Right?
Wow.
And I think once we start recycling it, then by definition, we've reached sustainability, right? Everything's circular. And it's not unprecedented. That's how the biosphere works. On Earth, we're all happily breathing out carbon dioxide and plants are capturing and converting it, and the cycle sort of continues. So this can be a really sustainable way to do things. And crucially, it also creates a sort of a reason to capture the carbon, aside from sustainability, because of course we need to capture carbon, but we also have to make it viable somehow.
So is anyone actually doing this yet, where they're sucking the carbon out of the atmosphere and then trying to do something else with it? I mean, is it actually, in existence yet?
There are a few companies around the world who have started on sucking carbon out of the air. And some of those trials have gone quite well. So some of those exist. There are also places that are taking carbon dioxide, most of them not directly from air yet, right? Maybe still from point sources, concrete plants, this sort of thing, and then turning that into fuel. So there is a scope now to sort of start combining that and really taking some big steps with that.
So what exactly is your research about in this respect? I mean, are you trying to find another way to suck carbon out the air, or something else to do with those recycled carbon atoms?
Yeah, so I'm really interested in sort of combining the two steps. So in many ways, like when we think about driving reactions as chemists, we think about binding something onto a surface, transforming it and releasing it. And this naturally has quite some overlap with carbon capture, because in carbon capture, we want to bind something onto the surface really strongly so we can grab onto it and take it away. And so I think once we've got it bound, if we can control that really well, then we can force renewable energy straight into the carbon at that point and convert it directly. And once it's converted, it's not the same molecule anymore. And so we made this site perfect to capture carbon dioxide. But now we've converted it. It's not carbon dioxide anymore. It doesn't stick. And so then it's released. So in this one step, we can capture, convert, and ideally, where we're really pushing is, can we get that straight into a liquid fuel?
Wow. So it sounds like an incredible win-win, almost too good to be true, that if you can find a way to suck the carbon out of the atmosphere, capture it, then with renewable energy, recycle it into something else like fuel, then suddenly you've got a way of recycling nature even more effectively than recycling an aluminium can or something like that. But I know that you have a particular dream of what one might be able to do with all that captured carbon, which could end up affecting kids around the world. Tell us about it.
Yeah, indeed. Because in the chemical sort of pyramid, fuels and plastics aren't actually that far away. So I think it'd be incredibly elegant if some of that captured carbon, rather than making it all into fuel, we diverted some of it off and used that to make plastics. And, imagine that captured carbon, we use those plastics to make Lego bricks. There would then be carbon capture and storage, and we'd turn this sort of menace that's heating and destroying our planet, and we'd sort of tame it as a children's plaything.
That would be amazing. I mean, because at the moment, we're all absolutely drowning in plastics.
Yeah.
And we keep giving our kids endless bits of, plastic baubles and things like that. And we all feel a bit guilty about it. Yeah. But if you were able to actually capture the carbon and turn that into carbon negative plastic bricks, suddenly it would make our kids happy and would have a green halo.
Yeah, indeed, you would. And you could always recycle it forever, right? Because if you took all the plastic that you couldn't recycle in the end, you could actually just burn it, and then you get back to CO2, and you could run the whole thing again.
Wow. And presumably it could be used, if you can have carbon negative plastic bricks, you can have carbon negative plastic everything. Plastic bags and all that kind of stuff.
You could do anything, it's just about. Yeah, so you'd offset sort of all the stuff we're making from oil. We could just cut that straight out, make it carbon negative, and there's our carbon capture.
But there are some people who might be listening to this and saying, well, one of the reasons why we think carbon capture sounds a bit weird or like a fantasy is because isn't carbon the problem? We keep being told that we have to be carbon neutral. Why are we suddenly so excited about carbon? Isn't that just a waste material?
It is a waste. And that's the key problem, right? That it's, something no one wants. It's just there. So if we say we're just pumping this out into the atmosphere, but if we make that a resource, then there's a real reason to capture it if we make something out of it. So if we imagine we're going to capture that and put that underground, right, we're going to have to spend a lot of money building that infrastructure and running that to put it underground. So, who's really going to pay for that? But if you can convert that into something that is useful, that is valuable, then there's an incentive to effectively mine the sky for carbon and replace the carbon we take from fossil fuels or oil wells. And let's use the carbon we have available, the waste.
Well, let's hope that works, because it sounds almost too good to be true. So what happens, just to be devil's advocate, if all the carbon you're capturing then starts leaking out again? I just have this vision of you capturing this stuff, and next thing you know, it's escaping out the back door.
No, I think that's a fair question. And if we're going to capture carbon and say, let's capture it and put it underground, which I'm not advocating for, that is a reasonable point, right? Because if we capture that and we say, let's fill up the oil well we just emptied with the carbon and pressurize it in there, at some point in history, it's going to rupture, right? It might be on a very distant point, but it's sitting there. Something will happen eventually.
Yeah, history shows if something can go wrong, it will.
It will eventually, right? So I think, that storage is an issue. But if as we're capturing it, only keeping a very small amount and converting that into product, converting that into fuel that's then burnt again and cycled around, converting that into plastic that's then quite safely stored, then we can sort of bypass that whole issue. We can move around that completely. And it has other benefits as well, actually, which I think we'll touch on with batteries as well, which is the geopolitical element, which is also interesting there, because that comes back to the spatial distribution of energy. So if we want to put carbon underground, we're also imagining that we can somehow get the carbon from where we're emitting it to this cavern where we're going to put it. I'm not sure how we're necessarily going to transport that, but it has to get there somehow.
So the bottom line is it makes a lot more sense, rather than capturing carbon and storing it, to capture carbon, recycle it into something useful, And that way, you're neither facing the problem with leakage, nor you're having to lug this stuff all around the world and cope with all the problems of borders and the risks of transport and things.
Yeah, indeed. You could just do that in a much easier way. And once we get, and I think eventually we will get there, to just taking it directly out of the air, you could even emit it on one side of the world and capture it on the other side in the desert where your solar panels are.
Wow.
Because there's no real difference from the perspective of the system at that point.
So even as we're trying to reduce our usage of fossil fuels, which are still, of course, emitting carbon, we can still try and capture all the carbon that's been emitting or which has been emitted before.
Yeah, and over time, we won't even need to use the fossil fuels. Because if we're making fuels from carbon dioxide, if you imagine that you scale that up completely and you make all your fuels from carbon dioxide, there's no more fossils are harmed in the making of this or the running of this society.
So does this mean that we can just keep burning fossil fuels indefinitely if we're managing to take carbon out of the atmosphere? Or do you think there'll come a time where we can actually get rid of fossil fuels altogether?
I think the aim of the game is to replace them, right? Replace them entirely. If we imagine, really scaling this technology infinitely, or to a practical size, actually, taking up a reasonable area of desert around the world. Let's say we make our facility big enough, our facilities, that we are capturing carbon and we produce enough carbon negative fuel to match the output of fossil fuels, and we drop that into society. Then every time we burn the fuel we produced, we're at net zero.
So the vision is that you basically capture carbon, you turn it into a fuel, which can be used instead of petrol, gas, whatever else.
Indeed.
And then you're using renewable energy to actually create that new fuel.
Yeah.
That's then burnt, and you have basically a virtuous circle.
Indeed. That would be the final goal. And for the record, I mean, we can make synthetic petrol out of carbon dioxide. Right?
We can make synthetic petrol already out of carbon dioxide.
Yeah, that's achievable. Yeah.
That's amazing. So when you go to a station in the future, if we're not using electric batteries for our cars, you could actually fill up your tank with recycled synthetic petrol.
Indeed. And this would be so crucial, electric cars are a wonderful technology, and I think they'll be, they're going to grow and grow. But for those technologies and those scales where batteries aren't working, like our jets, where batteries are going to be too big and heavy. I mean, powering a jet today on a battery, the battery's going to be bigger and heavier than the jet itself, right? That's a non-starter. But for those things, we'll still be able to do that, right? We'll be able to keep the lights on in our cities over, windless nights. Yeah.
Right. So the vision is basically this incredibly virtuous circle where we capture carbon, turn it into fuel, burn the fuel as synthetic petrol, capture more carbon, and just keep going, all powered by solar panels.
Yep. Build an oil well. Rather than tapping an oil well in the ground, let's build our own. Desert, solar panels, carbon capture, fuel production, off we go.
Well, there aren't a lot of deserts in the UK, but I'm sure there's other ways of doing this, and we can always transfer the electricity.
Definitely.
It takes an Australian to understand the power of deserts and sunshine. And so I'd love to talk to you, Zhuangan, and ask you what you're doing in this battle, because I know that you're involved in quite a different sphere as a material scientist, looking at batteries and, in particular, why lithium batteries are not the only answer to creating electric vehicles or all the other electrification techniques we want to try and fight climate change. Tell us what exactly you're doing.
Yeah, sure. So I'll come to the first part, lithium batteries. That's a general concept, and more technically, it is a lithium-ion battery. So that's from the technical word where people define it. But because it is a masterpiece, a huge success, and has been used, commercialized for 35 years already, and people still using that since 1990s. And that's definitely being a big success. But moving from today, point of view, so apparently, UK is the first major economy to promise the net zero. Phasing out the petrol and diesel cars is a key part of that. And that's why people come to the batteries.
Right. So basically, there's a big drive in the UK, like elsewhere, and the UK is really a leader in this respect, to get rid of old gas-guzzling cars, petrol-guzzling cars, and go to electric cars with batteries. But until now, those batteries, as I understand it, have been mostly using lithium and cobalt.
Yes.
Tell us, why we should all be a bit wary about lithium and cobalt. What's wrong with that?
Yeah, I think that's actually very important part of the limitation of today's lithium-ion battery. So of course, all the commercialization is related to cost. And if we really consider the lithium-ion batteries today are using rare metals like cobalt, and what people call it sometimes blood cobalt.
And by that, I mean, it comes from places in Africa which are really...
Exactly. So today, 80% of the cobalt mining in the Central Africa, Congo, and that gives a lot of geopolitical problem, and sometimes people complain about the child labor things about
there's
that.
Human rights issues, aren't there? So
yeah, exactly.
So basically, lithium and cobalt are two of the rare earth minerals, or two of these particular commodities that are central to electric batteries, but they come from places with big human rights problems.
Yeah, that's part of it. And of course, if we consider 80% of the resources is just in one country, that gives the restriction of the development of the technology, which means if there are some bad relationship between this country and the others, so the other country cannot use these resources to make the lithium-ion battery.
So lots of people are saying, yes, I want to go green. I want to get my electric vehicle. I need a battery, but I don't like what's inside that battery because it means we're dependent on one country, and that's a risk. So you have an idea about something better to put into the recipe for electric vehicle batteries, which is what? Tell us what you found instead.
That's true. I'm working on another lithium battery technology called lithium-sulfur, where I use sulfur as the active material instead of lithium cobalt oxide, this kind of conventional material. So the sulfur apparently is the fifth Earth's abundant material. You can easily find it around the hot spring, around the volcano area.
Well, sulfur you can find everywhere. You can smell it every time you go to a hot springs in Iceland or anywhere else like that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the first bit. It makes it very cheap and more sustainable compared with the single source of cobalt or nickel, this kind of rare metals. And secondly, sulfur works on a different working mechanism. So compared with the conventional ones, that provide more energy and that provide better performance for the battery compared with the conventional lithium cobalt nickel system. So basically, it's changed the reaction mechanism that's running through a more chemical reaction rather than a physical intercalation. So let's put it this way. So if we consider the lithium cobalt oxide take 1 electrons per reaction, the sulfur can take 16. So that's more than 10 times. I know a lot of people, they are not fully against EVs, but they think sometimes it's inconvenient because they don't want to charge it very often, and they want to charge it and make it running for longer distance. So people are anxious about the driving distance. And this sulfur technology will offer double the energy of today's lithium-ion battery in principle. And if that's achieved, then people don't need to worry about the driving distance.
So you mean basically sulfur is not only found everywhere. I mean, just go find a volcano or a hot spring and you can get some. You don't have to transport it everywhere. It's a lot cheaper.
Yep.
And it performs dramatically better.
Yeah.
10 times better than...
Yeah, in theory, yes. Theoretically, it is. Still, it's facing some challenge associated with the sulfur itself. But that's why researchers like me, we are working on that to solve that problem and to bring that to the practical market.
So it's a bit like Shannon's potential win-win with carbon capture in that if you manage to take the carbon molecules out of the air, you're cutting carbon, but you can then recycle it into something useful. In your case, if you're using sulfur, you have something which is cheap and easy to find everywhere. You're not dependent on just one country, or particularly a country with bad human rights. But you think you can also use sulfur in a way that's a lot more effective than the other options for creating electric batteries.
Exactly. Yeah, that's like a cheaper and at the same time offers higher performance. That's definitely a win-win technology.
That's amazing. I mean, I guess it's such an obvious win-win that why hasn't anyone done it before?
Well, so like the batteries innovation always take a very long time. So for example, like currently the lithium-ion battery, it takes about 20 years from the first proof of concept innovation to commercialization. That's a long way to go, apparently. And it's similar for this. So at the early stage, like when people first have the lithium-ion battery, so the power consumption of the like consumer like electronics or like even the early stage EVs is not that high. And until today, the demand of that, like the power consumption goes up and people realize, oh, we need something that's have more energy. And that's why this lithium sulfur battery come back to people's view. People consider, oh yeah, we should look into some high energy technology to move forward.
So this idea's been knocking around for a while. Just remind us all, when did the idea of creating the current lithium batteries first crop up? I mean, is this something that's been around for decades, or was it 10 years ago, 20 years ago?
It's actually about 1970s when people first come up with the concept, proof of concept.
I might just touch on that. So 70s indeed, and the Nobel Prize for it was only awarded in 2019.
Yeah, not far from now.
Okay, so if you manage to crack the sulfur one, maybe in 30 years' time, you'll get a Nobel Prize too.
Well,
we should get his autograph now.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's always like battery innovation is always a long way to go. So it's not easy path because you need to overcome a lot of things, not only like the technology part, you need to consider the supply chain and also you need to consider the cost. So that's always being in the consideration.
Fascinating. So does anybody actually have sulfur batteries out there yet? I mean, can anyone buy that if they want to go and get their electric vehicle today?
Not yet today. The cost is still very high, but there are a few like startup companies are working on that. And all the major battery manufacturers have put this lithium sulfur technology in their roadmap. So that's a good sign. And people realize the urgency to get a more sustainable, green and cheaper technology. And that's why this comes to the view.
I guess that's one reason why one needs to support lots of basic research in science, because you don't actually know when you're funding all these different areas of basic research, which one's going to actually work. And if you just chase down one path, you might be going down the wrong path and not realize there are other options out there as well.
Exactly. That's what is happening. So like for a lot of the questions I have these days, like I can find the answer in the very old papers and the very old publications. And that's being like how this technology developed. Like based on that, like standing on that, I can develop something new. I don't know whether it's going to be useful like for now, like at this moment, but it might be useful in the future, like when someone else have the similar problem, like it's limited by something, they can see it and they make something new.
And that's, of course, one of the reasons, frankly, why universities exist, because companies will have their big research and development departments that are funding the ideas which appear to have an immediate commercial application. But we need people who are actually throwing ideas against the wall and saying, let's go back to the future, try exploring this particular idea. We don't know if it's going to be useful, but you never know, in 20 or 40 or even 100 years' time, future scientists may come back and say, hey, that's our breakthrough.
Exactly. I agree. Build up the knowledge, accumulate the knowledge that we don't know, explore the new area, and to be very useful in the future. That's what I believe.
And Zhuangnan, in terms of what you're doing, how does Cambridge rank against others right now?
There are many people working on this, like different part of the world. And I think Cambridge has a unique ecosystem in support people to translate their laboratory innovation to the real market. That's also what I'm working on. I co-found a company, a startup with my colleagues to translate this technology. So the company is named Moliang. We are on the path to commercialize this thing as well. If we consider the driving force of science is curiosity, and the driving force of the collaboration should be mutual interest. That's when you talk to people, you have a mutual interest, then there is a potential to start to collaborate. And of course, King's offered a very good platform for us. We can meet here and we talk about science, we discuss, and that's where the intellectual conversation happens. And it helped me a lot. What do you think, Shannon?
I think specifically here, Cambridge really enables that, I think, in a very unique and nice way through the college system, right? So being, for example, here in King's, we can meet people from different departments very well, people we would otherwise have met. And I think, sort of meeting Zhuangnan here has been great. It's surprising, actually, I found how much it helps me develop my thinking, actually chatting to people from really diverse disciplines.
So when you sit next to someone now in your area, explaining things to them and make them aware of what you are working on and excited about what you are working on is very important. And especially today, that's very important skills for academics. When talk to other people, you need to excite them and you need to make them think you have a very good thing, you are working on an amazing thing. And experience here have been training me a lot.
I guess a lot of people listening to this will say, this sounds amazing. How do they find out more if they want to understand what's going on? Shannon, how do they find out what you're doing?
I'm working on a website. We're going to include the links. It will definitely show my technical skills. But we're going to have a website up, and I think we're going to include a link to that as well.
Right. And what about you, Shannon?
So I got my company, startup company running, and where we'll of course disclosure the things that is useful for the world. And still I'm working on fundamental research as well. I will communicate with people by certain publications. And also, additionally, I serve as an associate editor on a journal called Material Research Society, Energy and Sustainability. So that's a platform I can communicate with more readers about this energy and sustainability part.
Well, thank you to both of you. I mean, I'm not a chemist or material scientist, but I've just found this so thrilling to hear about these breakthroughs. Who knew that chemistry and material science could be so unbelievably exciting? It's really so inspiring to hear about your passion and what it could actually be used for. So good luck for all your work in Molion, and good luck with your dream of carbon negative Lego bricks, and really hope we can get back one day in the future and celebrate your success.
Thank you. I'll keep you posted about what is happening.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.